They used billions of pages of documents. And then they did it in all different languages they could get their hands on. And now, machine translation works very well indeed. They had more data. Now, one reason why we have so much more data in the society is because we are collecting more information about things that we always collected on. But another reason is because we are rendering into a data format things that were always informational, but that we never took the time or had the ability to put into a data form. So you can think about everything under the sun in a Dali-esque way, from our bodies to our refrigerators, perhaps. Certainly our cell phones datafy lots of things. Most things are going to actually have a data component. We're going to be able to quantify things that we never thought about it before. By putting it into a data format, we can store it, share it, process it, and extract new value from it. So think of our location, right? We created the Mercator system. We created longitude and latitude. Eventually, we created GPS for nuclear submarines who didn't have landmarks if they're out in the ocean for months at a time. And now, in our pockets with our smartphones, we've basically become datafied ourselves. Location, we can know most people at most times in many countries where they are because we've taken location and we've rendered it into data. You can think of it in terms of words, right? We have had inscriptions on the Temple of Delphi. We had scrolls. We had books, right? We then maybe scanned those books into digital form, but then we rendered them into data. And by putting them into data form, we can extract new value from literature. We can understand the entrance and exit of certain words and learn a little bit about our culture. A very promising technique is called text mining. You can imagine the researchers take every single journal article in medicine related to a particular disease and all the drug trials that have gone into it that may have stretched back for a century, since the early 1900s. And then you look for promising drug targets, things that were not part of the formal study, and so therefore you don't have a conclusion on, but are still mentioned in there. And then you can find out what are likely targets that might work and compounds that are still promising but didn't actually work out in that particular trial. And we're creating new drugs based on this. By datafying things, we can think of it in terms of very basic things we do every day, the basis of social media platforms. So Facebook datafies our friendships. Twitter datafies our conversations, Facebook datafies our friendships, and LinkedIn datafies our professional contacts. Think of it the way that you are all sitting right now. The way that you're sitting, the way that Ambassador Larson's sitting, the way that you're sitting, it's all different. And it's a function of things such as your leg length, your weight, the distribution of your weight, the contour of your back, lots of different things. So if I put 100 sensors under your seat right now, I could probably create an index of what your back posture is that is fairly unique to you. It's a little bit like a fingerprint. So what could I do with this information? Well, researchers in Tokyo are using this as an anti-theft device in cars. A person tries to steal your car, jumps into the car seat and drive off. The car recognizes that this is not an approved driver, and maybe the engine conks off unless you enter in a password. If you are the parent of a teenager, maybe you could think of another use of this technology. You say you're not allowed to drive after 11 p.m. and poof, like Cinderella's chariot, the engine doesn't work. Okay, so what if every single car in the United States had this in it? What could we do with that? Well, maybe if we aggregated that data, we would discover things that we didn't know. Maybe, for example, we'd be able to see what are the telltale shifts in body posture 30 seconds prior to an accident. And then maybe what we would have datafied is driver fatigue. And then maybe the service would be that the car would know to send an internal alarm to vibrate the steering wheel or to honk internally to say, hey, wake up, pay more attention. When we datify more aspects of living. IBM has a patent on a floor covering that's like a smartphone, so that it will know if someone's coming into the room. It's useful. It might know who the person is based on the way they walk and their weight. It would certainly know if someone is walking, falls down, and doesn't get up. And that's a very useful technology in an aging society. Our smartphones are not particularly smart. I carry mine in my pocket about here all the time. My arm is roughly the same, well, always the same length. With the same movement, I always pick it up and I enter my password to use it. Shouldn't my cell phone know, based on how I walk, my gait, that it's me and not someone else? Doesn't seem very smart today, but in the future, these are the sorts of things that we're going to do. Apple has a patent out on earbuds that collect all of our vital signs. Maybe we could try to datify overseas aid. Maybe we would find that if we look at where money goes into Kenya and don't treat it as Kenya, but treat it as where the actual aid is distributed, we'd recognize something new that we didn't see before. All the donors tend to give the money about an hour and a half drive from Nairobi. How strange. Maybe we'd find out that where the aid is going is just simply not where the poverty is based on the map. Maybe we would find out that in a tribal country, the aid is going in one area and not another, and when we talked about aid to Kenya, it was meaningless because we had to look at the different regions of Kenya. I'm picking on Kenya, although this is a real map. I don't want you to go off and sort of call the Kenya desk. These are the sorts of things that we can imagine doing when we apply data and quantitative thinking to practices that we've been doing for a long time. You can also apply analytics to it as well. And I'll talk about the one issue of higher education. So we've heard a lot about what's called MOOCs, these massive open online courses. Okay? Sebastian Thrun, a computer science professor at Stanford, had a course about a year and a half ago, and he had about 100,000 people sign up. 40,000 people, completed it. Huge numbers. Okay. He had this online course on machine learning, and it was a course that he was teaching at Stanford, and he had anyone on the internet who was able to take the class. At the end of the course, he can rank the students by performance. At what number did the first Stanford student arrive on the ranking? Okay. Was the Stanford student number 1? What do you think? No. No. Easy. Okay. That was always the ruse. Okay. Number 2. 3, 4. Okay. In the top 10, how many Stanford students were in it? Do you all know? Okay. So you're right. The first Stanford student appeared at number 414. Yeah, ooh. So if you were the provost of Stanford, you would basically say, bring Sebastian to my office, put him against the wall and shoot him. Right? Like, what does it mean to be a school, an institution, in an era in which you have to teach so many people and it's a little transparent how the rankings go. What it does mean, which is great, is that Stanford has to do something different, has to compete. It has to do what we've sort of always known, but we've never sold our universities based on, which is the relationships, the connections with the staff, with other students. It's about the environment of learning, not just the classroom instruction. But the interesting thing about MOOCs is many people talk about how it's opening up access to education. That is only part of the story. The other part of the story that's less noticeable is, what do you do with all this data? So, another story. Andrew Nee is another professor at Stanford and has another machine learning course, and his students took it. And you watch a video and then you do the homework, you keep on going. And he noticed a few strange things. The first thing he noticed is that students would get to around class 13, 14, or 15, and then a huge percentage of them were going back to lesson number 7. And he couldn't understand why they weren't taking it sequentially, but always going back. And he realized that lesson number 7 was a math refresher class. And he realized that a lot of the people didn't have confidence in their math skills. So he learned from that and realized, I've got to put more lessons in math so that they can keep on going without feeling hamstrung, a few weeks later, a few months later. So it changed him and his pedagogical approach. There's more. So many students talk to each other on a forum and try to help each other with their answers. And he can identify student performance by their tests, because they're all essentially online, they're electronic, you type in your answers. You can also watch what they've done on the forum, what they've submitted, what they've read. So you can run a quasi-complex algorithm, but it's not, once you build it, then it's done, that looks at what questions you later got correct on another test, what forum posts you've read, and you can identify what are, for example, the 6 posts that you need to read to go from a C to a B or a B to an A. Basically, gets rid of the noise, gets rid of the clutter, and says, okay, if you do this, you will get that. And I know with this degree of probability that if you just spend 2 hours, because you can also know how long people spent on reading this, spend 2 hours reading these 6 things, you will increase your grade point average. Never able to do that before. Impossible. Okay? These are the sorts of things that we can do. Language acquisition. Most of you all, actually all of you, speak foreign languages. Okay. So we know how difficult it is to learn a foreign language. We also know, you folks in particular, how to teach a foreign language. There's lots of theories. But the theories change. And the reason the theories change is because the truth is we really have no idea how to teach a foreign language. We think we know how to teach foreign languages really well. We don't really. And the reason why is that even when we've tried to study it, we've had really small n's, really small samples. We couldn't just do it over a broad base. Online, it's better. So here's what we have. Louis Van Ahn is a computer scientist at the University of Carnegie Mellon. And he has an online site that teaches people language by translating texts and then other people suggesting whether this is the right translation or not. You both do a translation as well as you learn the language. It's great. It's called Duolingo. But he has 30 million users, and they average 30 minutes a week. He has a lot of data. What he's identified, and he's run tests, random A/B tests, to actually see if the data is correct by checking it and analyzing it this way, so he can actually intervene and do different things with students by showing them different things. He found out that language acquisition really depends on what is your mother tongue and what is the language you're learning. And you need to tailor and structure the instruction based on that. What he found, for example, is that when native Spanish speakers are learning English, what do? Should we teach the pronouns first or the adverbs? Right? We don't know, right? We can test it. He found out that a lot of people would be cutting out their lessons after about 10 weeks or so. And he could identify why. Because they hit pronouns, they see he, she, and it, and they get really confused because they don't have it in Spanish. So he just realized, well, what if we test it and we give them he and she, but we delay it another month and a half? And of course, the rates of people maintaining their instruction skyrocket. By making these changes, we can affect how we teach language. These are the sorts of things that we can play for. These are the kind of things we can learn from when we use the data. Now, there are risks as well. I've given you the rosy-glassed view of big data. There are problems as well. Obviously, privacy is a problem today in a small data universe. It's going to be a bigger problem in a big data universe. These problems are very topical. But in addition, there's something else, and that is the idea that not just privacy, there's an issue of propensity, that we may have algorithms making decisions about what we are likely to do and penalizing us prior to us actually having committed the infraction. So if this sounds a little bit like Minority Report, it kind of is. And already in many cities in the country and around the world, there's the idea of predictive policing, where we actually send the squad cars to certain areas based on data of where a previous crime was. Today, these things are embryonic, but they're only better, and they are going to go down to the individual. So what does this mean? How do we regulate ourselves in a world in which we have big data algorithms making decisions about us? Probably need to go from a regime of collection to use. For propensity, perhaps what we need to safeguard most of all in the judicial system is free will, human agency, moral choice. We need to build in the same sort of transparency and accountability into big data, so it's not just a black box. And maybe we need a new professional class. We'll call them algorithmists, who can serve as officers of companies, advisors to courts, to help the public understand the harms and the risks of big data. And maybe we need antitrust to regulate the nascent data barons, posing the question, well, who owns the data? But there is actually something more, and it's important, and I'm actually proud to bring it up to you, because it's something that we're all going to have to deal with as citizens, as public servants, and as journalists. It's what I call the dictatorship of data. It's the idea that we may endow the information with more meaning, blinded by data's false charms, thinking that we're quantifying something and acting on information in a responsible way when we're not. In our own history, we have a lot of experience of thinking that we could look at a spreadsheet and understand when the situation on the ground is a lot more complex. It is almost a function of human nature, from sort of collectivized farming to how we respond to lots of crises, that public authorities reach for what is quantified and then trust that that's the right thing, when we obviously know that map is not territory, that the data is only a simulacrum of reality, not the real thing. So it's a whole new world. The good news is that big data is going to allow us to educate our children better, the way that we live in terms of health. It's going to allow a car to drive itself, but we owe it to be aware of its risks as well as its potential, and use this new tool with humility and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Wow, that was really, that was big, right? So some of you listened to that and thought, oh my God, I'm never getting on the internet again. And others of you thought, wait, I've got to get on the internet and add some more data to it. So in case you missed it, on the back of your name tag is the logon information. So it is password protected, but it's on the back of your name tag. And then the other thing is, there's a lot of people anxious to be here today. So if I could encourage you, the folks that are sort of in the middle, to cuddle up a little bit more and move in. We actually have people that are still arriving, and so it'll be a little bit less disruptive when they arrive if we fill those sort of seats that are in between folks. I know it's an awkward thing to ask, but really we're all good people here. So thanks very much for that. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce two career ambassadors. Before becoming the vice chairman of the Cohen Group, Ambassador Mark Grossman served as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. He is a 29-year career ambassador, and as Undersecretary, he helped marshal diplomatic support for the international response to the attacks of September 11, 2001. He also managed U.S. policies in the Balkans and Colombia, and he promoted a key expansion of the NATO alliance. As Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, he helped direct NATO's military campaign in Kosovo and an earlier round of NATO expansion. He gave a lot to the State Department. He retired, and then President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called him back to work again. So he dutifully came back to work again and served as the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Grossman supported the support Bonn, Chicago, and Tokyo, and he provided U.S. backing for an Afghan peace process in 30 years of conflict, and played a very important part in restoring U.S. ties with Pakistan. Please welcome to the stage Ambassador Grossman. And now also please welcome me, and along with me, welcome Ambassador Alan Marcin. He's a distinguished economist, and he is also a career ambassador in the U.S. Foreign Service. He served as Undersecretary of Economics, Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, and Ambassador to the OECD. He now provides clients with strategic advice, counseling, and representation at the intersection of international business and Ambassador Levin as he comes to the stage. Great, thanks. And I'll now turn it over to Mr. Cukier, who will usher this conversation forward. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I see my role as facilitate a conversation between both of you, the three of us, and the others as well. I feel like I've spoken already. Is there any? I'd be interested in what your reaction is to. Trotsky's famous phrase.
Yeah, lots more than a dilettante. If what you're I don't know. What's a
Well, I wonder if you could maybe help us as we focus in on this fascinating issue of big data as applied to diplomacy, where we might look. I mean, you gave some terrific examples from health, flu, DNA sequencing, and so forth. The Kenya example is interesting because I actually taught school in Kenya. But I'd be interested in just any reflections that you or Mark or others have about where more creative use of data can really help us in foreign affairs. As I thought about, I'm a data guy, economist. I used to think that I was one of the guys who was really trying to promote this in our foreign affairs, Mark. But I feel like a dinosaur too compared to this, and I also see some risks that we can talk about later. But I wonder if you just have some thoughts, anyone has thoughts about where are the really fertile areas in diplomacy to make better use of data?
I might just say that in thinking about it, I'll give you a couple just to start out. First of all, I'd like to go back to the question of Moneyball before I take on the very important, points that you made. I think the Moneyball analogy is a very interesting one. A baseball fan, I read the book, I saw the movie, I follow this with interest. But I think for me, as a